The golden autumn leaves danced in the wind when Atsena received the news that would seal her fate. Sitting by the river that cut through the Cherokee village, she watched the flowing waters while her mother, Unali, spoke about the agreement made with Chief Moitoi. The 18-year-old would be promised to MVHI, the leader's son, a union that would strengthen the bonds between the most influential families of the tribe and guarantee protection during the difficult times approaching with the pressure from white settlers. Atsena kept her gaze fixed on the submerged stones, where small silver fish swam in circles. Her mother spoke about honor, duty, and the importance of preserving ancestral traditions, but the words seemed as distant as mountain echoes. The young woman had known NVHI since childhood, a brave and respected warrior, but whose gaze had never awakened any warmth in her heart. She nodded silently, accepting the weight of responsibility she carried as the daughter of a noble lineage. As she walked back to the village, Atsena passed by Gawoni's tent, the healer who had arrived 2 years ago from the northern mountains. He was preparing medicinal herbs, his skilled hands separating dried leaves with a delicacy she had always admired. Gawoni looked up and offered a gentle smile, as he always did when she passed by. There was something different about this man, a serenity that contrasted with the constant agitation of the young warriors, a wisdom that seemed to spring from deep experiences. The healer was not considered a suitable match for someone of her position. He owned no land, had no influential family, and dedicated his life to caring for the sick and wounded. But when Atsena watched him work, mixing potions and humming ancient healing songs, she felt a peace she had never experienced before. It was as if he knew secrets that went beyond the warrior traditions and power struggles that dominated village life. That night, while the stars shone over the mountains, Atsena remained awake on her mat. She thought about the future awaiting her beside NVHI, about the approaching ceremonies and the life she was supposed to embrace. But part of her heart remained restless, as if some invisible force whispered that another path was possible. She didn't yet know that this feeling was the harbinger of a passion that would completely transform the course of her existence. Wedding preparations began with winter's arrival. Atsena spent her days learning traditional songs and embroidering the ceremonial garments she would wear at the union. Her younger cousins surrounded her with admiration, speaking about the fortune of marrying the chief's son and about the warrior children she would bear. The young woman smiled and participated in the conversations, but her heart remained divided between duty and a growing unrest she couldn't explain. During a cold afternoon, while gathering medicinal roots for her mother, Atsena injured her hand on a thorn. The wound bled more than expected, and she decided to seek Gawoni for proper treatment. She found the healer organizing his remedies in small clay containers, each marked with symbols he had created himself. When he saw the wound, Gawoni asked her to sit and, with careful movements, cleaned the cut with an herbal mixture. While he tended to her hand, Atsena observed his concentrated face. Gawoni had features marked by time and wisdom, deep eyes that seemed to hold stories of many lives. He spoke softly about the healing properties of plants, explaining how each element of nature had a specific purpose. His voice was calm and melodious, very different from the war cries that echoed during the young warriors' training. When he finished the bandage, Gawoni didn't immediately release her hand. For a moment, their eyes met, and Atsena felt an electric current run through her entire body. It was as if he could see through her soul, understanding fears and desires she couldn't even name herself. The healer looked away first, murmuring a healing prayer, but Atsena realized that something fundamental had changed between them in that instant. In the following days, she found excuses to pass by Gawoni's tent. Sometimes she pretended to need herbs for her mother, other times she offered help organizing the remedies. He always received her with kindness, but maintained a respectful distance, as if he knew she belonged to another world. Atsena began to perceive that the healer also felt the attraction growing between them, but his honor and respect for traditions prevented him from expressing any feelings. This restraint only intensified her desire to know him better, to discover the secrets he kept in his silent heart. The first snowfall of winter brought with it an epidemic that devastated the village. Many fell ill with high fevers and persistent coughs. and Gawoni worked tirelessly to care for the sick. Atsena offered to help him, claiming she knew some healing techniques she had learned from her grandmother. In truth, she sought a reason to spend more time beside the healer, to better understand the man who increasingly occupied her thoughts. During the long nights of vigil, while caring for the sick, Atsena and Gawoni developed a silent intimacy. They communicated through glances and gestures, anticipating each other's needs without requiring words. When a child cried in pain, Atsena would rock them, while Gawoni prepared the remedy. When the healer showed fatigue after hours of work, she would substitute him in simpler tasks, allowing him to rest. One night, while preparing tea for an elderly woman who was delirious with fever, Gawoni finally broke the silence that enveloped them. He spoke about his youth in a distant village, about how he had lost his family in a settler attack, and how he had found in the art of healing a way to honor the memory of those who had gone. His words were laden with pain and wisdom, revealing a man who had transformed suffering into compassion for others. Atsena listened in silence, feeling that each of his words resonated in her own heart. She understood that Gawoni was not just a healer, but someone who had chosen to dedicate his life to alleviating others' pain. When he finished speaking, she extended her hand and gently touched his arm, a simple gesture that carried all the affection and admiration she felt for him. Gawoni looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race, and for the first time, she saw vulnerability in his eyes. In that moment, both knew they had crossed the boundaries of respectful friendship. The love that had grown silently between them now pulsed like an uncontrollable force, challenging social conventions and the future that others had planned for them. Atsena felt she was facing a choice that would define the rest of her life: follow the safe path of duty or embrace a passion that could destroy everything she knew. The epidemic finally subsided with spring's arrival, but the relationship between Atsena and Gawoni had been irreversibly transformed. They could no longer pretend to be mere casual acquaintances, and the tension between them was palpable whenever they met. The healer tried to maintain distance, knowing the young woman was promised to another, but his eyes involuntarily sought her during village activities. NVHI, the chief's son, began to notice the changes in his betrothed's behavior. Atsena seemed distant during conversations. Her thoughts always turned to some faraway place. When he tried to touch her or show affection, she would subtly pull away. Claiming shyness or concern about wedding preparations, the young warrior, accustomed to having everything he desired, grew frustrated with the growing coldness of the woman who was supposed to be his wife. One afternoon, while walking alone on the mountain trails, Atsena encountered Gawoni collecting rare herbs that only grew at high altitudes. They looked at each other in silence, and all the restraint they had tried to maintain melted away like snow in the sun. Without words, they walked together along the slope, their hands occasionally touching when one helped the other traverse difficult terrain. The simple contact was electrifying, charged with all the repressed desire they had kept for months. When they reached a clearing protected by tall pines, Gawoni finally turned to her. His eyes reflected an internal struggle between the love he felt and respect for the traditions that had shaped him. Atsena approached him, placing her hand over his heart, feeling the accelerated beats that mirrored her own. In that moment, she knew she could no longer live a lie, pretending to love one man while her heart belonged completely to another. Gawoni tried to speak about impossibilities, about the consequences they would face if someone discovered what was happening between them. But Atsena silenced his words with a gentle kiss, a gesture that sealed both their fates. When they separated, she whispered that she would rather face any punishment than live a life without true love. The healer understood he had found a soul brave enough to challenge the world for love, and his resolve to maintain distance completely dissolved. Secret meetings became more frequent in the following weeks. Atsena and Gawoni would meet in the mountain clearing, where they could be free to express the feelings that had grown between them. He taught her about plant properties, about ancient healing songs, about life philosophies that valued compassion above conquest. She shared her dreams of a different life, where she could choose her own path instead of following expectations imposed by others. During these encounters, Atsena discovered facets of herself she never knew existed. Under Gawoni's loving gaze, she felt free to be vulnerable, to express fears and hopes she had always kept secret. The healer, in turn, found in her love a reason to dream of a future that went beyond the solitary care of the sick. Together, they imagined a simple life somewhere distant, where they could live in harmony with nature and each other. But reality continued to press upon them. Preparations for Atsena's wedding to NVHI intensified, and the entire village participated in the rituals that preceded the ceremony. The young woman was subjected to purifications and blessings, always smiling and nodding when expected, but her heart bled with each ritual that brought her closer to a union she despised. At night, she cried silently, imagining what her life would be like beside a man she didn't love. Gawoni watched the preparations with growing anguish. He knew that each passing day brought them closer to the moment when he would lose Atsena forever. The pain was almost unbearable, but he also understood the implications of interfering in an agreement involving the tribe's most powerful families. Any impulsive action could result in exile or death, not only for him, but also for the woman he loved. It was during one of these tormented nights that Atsena made a decision that would change everything. She could no longer bear the idea of marrying NVHI, of living a lie for the rest of her life. She decided she would flee with Gawoni, even if it meant abandoning her family, her social position, and everything she knew. The love she felt was stronger than any social convention, and she was willing to pay any price to be free to live it. The new moon offered perfect cover for the escape Atsena had meticulously planned. She gathered only the essentials, some clothes, medicinal herbs, and the jewelry her grandmother had left her as inheritance. She left a letter explaining her decision to her mother, asking for forgiveness, but reaffirming that she couldn't live without true love. She knew her words would cause pain and shame to her family, but hoped they might someday understand her choice. Gawoni initially resisted the idea of escape, fearing the consequences Atsena would face for abandoning such an important commitment. But when he saw the determination in her eyes, the courage she demonstrated in choosing love over security, he understood he couldn't abandon her. He prepared his own provisions, including the medicines and healing instruments that would be essential for surviving in unknown territory. They met in the clearing before dawn, when the stars still shone faintly in the sky. Atsena trembled, not from cold, but from the magnitude of what they were about to do. Gawoni enveloped her in his arms, transmitting strength and determination through the embrace. Together, they began the walk along the trail that would take them away from the village, heading toward the higher mountains, where they hoped to find refuge among other tribes who didn't know their story. The journey was more difficult than they had imagined. The trails were steep and dangerous, especially in the darkness that protected them from possible pursuers. Atsena, accustomed to village comfort, struggled against exhaustion and fear. But Gawoni's presence beside her strengthened her. He knew the mountains well and guided them safely, always alert to nature's signs that could indicate danger or shelter. When the sun rose, they had covered considerable distance, but they knew the discovery of their escape wouldn't be long delayed. NVHI would certainly organize a search when he realized his betrothed had disappeared. Atsena looked back one last time, seeing the village smoke rising in the distant valley. She was leaving behind everything she knew, but for the first time in her life, she felt she was following her true destiny. The pursuit began at midday, when Atsena's family discovered her absence and the letter she had left. NVHI, wounded in his pride and enraged by the disobedience, gathered a group of warriors to track the fugitives. Chief Moitoi, seeing his authority publicly challenged, authorized the search and promised severe punishment for whoever had stolen the bride promised to his son. The entire village was in uproar, divided between condemnation of Atsena's attitude and secret admiration for her courage. Gawoni and Atsena heard the pursuers' shouts echoing through the mountains when they were resting near a stream. The healer knew that region well and knew they needed to leave the main trail to confuse the trackers. He led Atsena through rocky passages and dense pine forests, paths that only someone with his deep knowledge of nature could navigate safely. For 3 days, they ran and hid, living on minimal food and water, always one step ahead of their pursuers. Atsena demonstrated a resistance she didn't even know she possessed, enduring hunger, cold, and extreme fatigue without complaint. The love she felt for Gawoni and the freedom they had conquered together gave her strength she didn't know existed. He, in turn, increasingly admired the courage and determination of the woman who had chosen to share his destiny. On the third night, while sheltering in a natural cave, Atsena fell ill with high fever. The stress of the escape, combined with exposure to cold and inadequate nutrition, had weakened her defenses. Gawoni used all his healing knowledge to treat her, preparing infusions with the herbs he had brought and keeping her warm with his own body. For the first time since the beginning of their escape, he felt real fear, not of being captured, but of losing the woman he loved. The pursuers' shouts approached during the night, forcing them to make a desperate decision. Atsena, even weakened by illness, insisted they continue their escape. Gawoni carried her in his arms, climbing increasingly dangerous trails, determined to take her to a safe place where she could recover. They knew they were reaching the limit of their strength, but the love that united them was stronger than any physical obstacle. Destiny caught up with them on a foggy morning when they were trying to cross a narrow gorge in the highest mountains. NVHI and his warriors finally found them, surrounding them in a position from which there was no escape. The chief's son was transfigured by rage and humiliation, his honor wounded by his betrothed's public flight. He demanded that Atsena return immediately to marry him, promising only exile for Gawoni if he didn't resist. Atsena, even weakened by illness, rose beside Gawoni with dignity. She declared she would rather die than live without true love, that her choice had been made with full awareness of the consequences. Her words echoed through the mountains like a final challenge to the traditions that tried to control her destiny. Gawoni, seeing the unwavering determination of the woman he loved, took her hand and stood beside her, ready to face any punishment. Enfiaxi, blinded by fury, unsheathed his spear, determined to kill the healer who had stolen his betrothed. But as he prepared to attack, Atsena placed herself between the two men, protecting Gawoni with her own body. The gesture was so unexpected and courageous that even the most hardened warriors hesitated. She looked directly into Nvachi's eyes without fear and declared that true love could not be possessed or controlled by force. NVHI's spear found Atsena's heart, and she fell into Gawoni's arms with a serene smile on her lips. She had chosen to die free rather than live as a prisoner, and her final courage impressed even her pursuers. Gawoni held her hand as she breathed her last, whispering words of love and promises that her memory would live forever in his heart. The warriors returned to the village with news of Atsena's death, but her story of love and sacrifice spread like fire through the region. Gawoni was spared from execution, but carried the pain of loss for the rest of his life, honoring the memory of the courageous woman who had chosen love over security. He continued his journey through the mountains, healing the sick and telling the story of a love that defied all social conventions. The legend of Atsena and Gawoni became a symbol that true love, even when it ends in tragedy, leaves an eternal legacy of courage and freedom that inspires future generations. If you like this story, leave a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next stories.